Paul Brunton explains the world's perennial wisdom. Living as Overself, the True Philosophers. Video Series 4, Video Number 3, presented by the Paul Brunton Philosophic Foundation. If this attainment of radiant inward glory is rare, it is not only because few consciously strive for it, but also because few know the law governing the attainment itself, and that is a twofold law of balance and wholeness. The goal of self-elimination, which is held up before us, refers only to the animal and lower human selves. It certainly does not refer to the annihilation of all self-consciousness. The higher individuality always remains, but it is so different from the lower one that it does not make much sense to discuss it in human language. Hence, those who have adequately understood it write or talk little about its higher mysteries. The true philosophers are conscious daily of the blessed inward life of the Overself, indescribable in its serenity, loveliness, strength, and sacredness. Keeping the mind in equilibrium, in a state of equipoise which remains undistracted and undisturbed by external forces and events, becomes perfectly natural in time, and is a state in which they continue until death. It is not a monotonous condition, as some might believe, but one of such satisfaction that we can only faintly envisage it in comparison with our material joys deprived of their emotional excitements. In this unique state, which belongs only to the higher phases of mysticism, there is, at one and the same time, intense feeling, but also intense thought, divine love in the heart, and inspired understanding in the head, steel-hard strength in the will, yet sublime surrender of it. The whole self is engaged in this holy communion and not merely a part of it. They are true philosophers who neither fall into the trap of warring sectarianism nor allow others to push them into it, who look for and accept the flowering of what is best and truest in all the religions and movements, ideas and principles, but themselves remain unlabeled. They must refuse to restrict themselves to or to conform with any single fixed and rigid faith. Whatever leads to a superior quality of consciousness is welcome, wherever it be found, and whenever it originated. They become open channels through which flows the beneficent, educative, and redemptive power of the Overself. Their free soul has brought their thought and actions into perfect harmony with nature's morality. They live not merely for themselves alone, but for themselves as part of the whole scheme. Consequently, they do not injure others, but only benefit them. They do not neglect their own benefit, however, but make the two work together. Their activities are devoted to fulfilling the duties and responsibilities set for them by their best wisdom, by their higher self. Philosophers are religious devotees inasmuch as they find the real sacred and holy. They are respecters of science. They test theory against fact, belief against observation. They are lovers of aesthetic beauty, seeking its higher forms in nature, poetry, music, and other arts. They are metaphysicians, transcending materialism by responding to intuitive intelligence. It is not an exclusiveness born of spiritual pride, but of spiritual humility. For philosophers feel profoundly that they must respect other people's viewpoint because it is the result of their own individual experience of life. The world is necessarily affected by their presence and activities, and affected beneficially. First, the mere knowledge that such a person exists helps others to continue with their efforts at self-improvement. For they know then that the spiritual quest is not a vain dream, but a practicable affair. Second, they influence those they meet to live better lives, whether they be few or many, influential or obscure. Third, they leave behind a concentration of spiritual forces which work on for a long time through other persons after they leave this world. Fourth, if they are a sage and balanced, they will always do something of a practical nature for the uplift of humanity. Truth is our only salvation, the final truth that in essence, as mind, nobody is really disconnected from God, that the delusion of being alone and separate from the infinite life creates all our weaknesses, which in turn lead to most of our troubles, and that we are here to learn by experience what sort of stuff we are really made of. If the end of all existence were only a merger at best, or annihilation at worst, it would be a senseless and sorry scheme of things. It would be unworthy of the divine intelligence and discreditable to the divine goodness. The consciousness stripped of thought, which looks less attractive to you than the hazards of life down here, is really a tremendous enlargement of what thought itself tries to do. Spiritual advance is really from a less to a more. There is nothing to fear in it, and nothing to lose by it, except by the standards and values of the ignorant. They will unite in the divine first by completely disappearing into it, then by discovering their higher individuality in it. When the two selves become one, the inner conflict vanishes. Peace, rich and unutterable, is theirs. They have extended their consciousness to the Overself, displaced the ego from its age-old tyranny, and become the full humans they intended to be. The real truth is so wonderful that it is what it is because it is too good to be true in the little mind's expectations. Quotes were taken from the Notebooks of Paul Brunton, Volume 13, Part 2, What is Philosophy? Paul Brunton, 1898 to 1981, a best-selling British author of a dozen books, spent much of his early life researching the original sacred teachings of Western and Eastern spiritual traditions. He traveled the world to discover and communicate with Christian, Kabbalistic, Vedantic, Buddhist, Taoist, indigenous, and Sufi masters. Blending the richness of his own spiritual experience and inquiry with these ancient and contemporary teachings, he developed a philosophy and path of practice that suits life in the 21st century, one that expresses the greatest wisdom and love available to humankind. Regardless of how it is named, we each have a divine soul, an overself or higher self, that is with us here and now, waiting to be realized. Paul Brunton's writings are a source of deep spiritual guidance for all those interested in living a divinely inspired life.